Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Corey Webb, and I'm a marketing director here at Churn, and I'd like to welcome you to our first mini webinar as part of CSM Appreciation Week. Today's topic is how to hit all of your accounts with value regularly. Before we get started, I do want to remind you that we are recording today's session, and we will be sending out a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides afterwards. So today, this is a quick hit webinar. We'll have about 20 minutes worth of content, and we'll try and save 10 minutes worth of questions at the end. But please do go ahead and submit your questions throughout as you have them. And we have both the chat and the Q&A enabled for today's webinar, so please engage. Okay, let's go get started. I'd like to introduce you to Ryan Johansen. Ryan is the founder of Stress Less and Get More Done, which is a training program that helps employees build skills that they need to beat burnout and work smarter. So perfect for today's topic. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Ryan.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thanks so much for showing up. Very excited to be here today. The topic is we're going to talk about one of the bigger challenges that happens in CS is we all probably have very large books of business, and how do you keep in touch with them regularly? So let's dive into it. I'm based in the Boston area, and to get everyone used to this, I'm going to come to you to enter things in the chat from here to there to keep you engaged and excited. So I'd love to hear real quick, where are you zooming in from, and what did you have for lunch, or what is for lunch, depending on where you are. And I'm based in Boston, but I'm actually in New York today, and I had a burrito for lunch, which is typically what I do. So feel free to do the chat. And then the other thing too, we're going to do 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. So feel free to submit questions in the Q&A and not the chat. Small caveat there, but let's hop into it today. So after you've gone through that, would like to see in the chat. Okay, still hungry. All right, great. Loving seeing all these people. I'm seeing a couple familiar names too. Good to see everyone here. Thank you so much for coming. This is great. Cool. So how many accounts does everyone have here? This chat's going to be going crazy right now, but 37, 120, 120, 30. Okay. So pretty good mix of people, 467. Wow. You are in luck right now. And it's really difficult to handle all of those, but we're going to talk about a way to make this a little bit more practical. So I'm going to walk through quickly and let me know if any of this might have sounded familiar. If you've ever heard it either from a, maybe a talking head on LinkedIn or someone you work with, but you need to be more proactive and not reactive. Have you potentially heard, we need to do more with less? This is one of the most painful sayings in CS right now, but it's a reality. So talk about a couple of things here. And then the other challenge that we hear is we need to do things more scalable. And these can be really challenging things where if you feel like you're under-resourced, you're spread thin, treading water, it's really hard to think of creative ways to do this. So I'm very pumped to share a playbook that worked really well for me when I was going through the same thing. We had a lot of different accounts, not a good amount of headcount, and had to get really creative with how we interacted with our customers. But a lot of us have the best intentions where it's not like you don't want to talk to these accounts, but there's a lot of challenges. So let's hear in the chat, what are some of the things, like I know that you all want to get in touch with your contacts or your accounts. What gets in the way there? Like, what are some of the things that makes it challenging? Let's hear some of the challenges that you might be facing. Ghosting, got that. Yeah. Zendesk. Interested to hear how that works. Accurate contact info. Okay. What are some of the other problems that you come? Yeah. Will it be interesting to them? That's a really good answer. Ghosting. Execs don't want to talk to a CSM. Emergencies, time of the year. Turnover. Yeah. Okay. So the pain is there. I'm going to mention a few when they come with them. Low ball competitors. Don't we hate those? Okay. So these are some of the challenges that we have. So I'm seeing a few of these already mentioned, but you might have other noisy customers. This, in my experience, was one that if you only paid attention to the loudest customers, you might miss out on good opportunities with the quieter customers. And in my opinion, a quiet customer can be a dangerous customer because you don't know what's going on there. The other thing too, it can feel like priorities constantly shift. So it can feel like maybe I need to do something different and you're having a little bit of a challenge. The next thing is it can feel like there's a lack of a time when you have so many things going on, so many priorities. It's really hard to take the time to proactively engage with your customers and add value and find out what they're looking for. The other thing too is maybe you have a little bit of time, you sit down and then you ask yourself, well, what should I send? Or you're like, I don't know if they're going to care about this. I actually just saw that exactly, that someone's having a challenge there. The other thing too, it can feel like you have way too many accounts, and that's a real pressure. It can be really challenging. And then the last part is maybe there's a lack of process or structure. And that's a symptom of some of these other issues, and we'll talk through what we can actually do about this. But here's where it gets ugly. if you're not reaching out to your accounts proactively, despite your best intentions, it's going to make life an uphill battle for you. Things start to fall through the cracks. Time flies by. I'm sure you've all had accounts in your book of business that you had best intentions of reaching out to, and you look at your CRM and you're like, oh wow, I haven't talked to them in 8 months. Whoops. Or hey, I keep meaning to do this, but it keeps falling aside. According will be sent to you. Renewals get harder because if you're not talking to your customers, that's when I saw that in the chat, your low ball competitors can swoop in and steal things from you. Or you're not sure about what's going to happen, or you feel like you're not adding value to it. Also, the other side of that is you miss upselling opportunities. So if you're not engaged with your customers, you don't know what's going on with that account. They're having challenges that they're not telling you about. That's kind of one of the worst ones. It can be really difficult. And then it starts to feel like you have all these different accounts. You're not able to keep in touch with them frequently, and you feel like you're playing from behind. And then you're a CSM that becomes every parent's worst nightmare. I don't know if it's exactly their worst nightmare, but you only reach out when you want money. And that's kind of one of the worst things to do as a CSM. And even, we feel bad doing it, but sometimes there's so much going on that it's just kind of what happens. So with all those kind of painful things out, let's talk about how to fix them. And that's just, I'm not trying to drag everyone through the mud here. I've dealt with all these challenges too, but it's super important to just get an understanding of, what's actually getting in the way, what the obstacles are before we can figure out what's the best way to look at them. So let's go through these two simple things that I found to add value proactively to my accounts. The first is something called an account outreach matrix, and the second is something called the value menu. These might sound kind of fancy, but they're very kind of simple names that I decided to put to a pretty straightforward process where I could stay on top of my accounts on a little bit more of a predictable basis. So I already asked you how many accounts you have. For the account outreach matrix, this is the two variables that we're going to need. You need how many accounts do you have? So we've already answered that. Then you ask yourself, how often, ideally, would you like to reach out to these customers? If you're an enterprise CSM, maybe that's something weekly or bi-weekly. If you're kind of in the middle with mid-market, let's say you got about 40 accounts, you want to reach out to them monthly or whatever your cadence is. Or if you're more of an SMB, you have a couple hundred accounts, that's something where maybe you want to do it quarterly. Let's talk about how we can get these two variables and then give ourselves somewhat of a normalized schedule to follow through on these accounts with. So I want to introduce you to the account outreach matrix. And all this is you're taking the amount of accounts you have and dividing it by how frequently you want to reach out to them to give ourselves a smaller, more manageable number. So instead of trying to keep up with 10 enterprise accounts every single day, you're breaking that out into a simple number that you're just reaching out to 2 accounts a day. For all of these, it's like reaching out to 4 accounts a day, pretty straightforward. Instead of trying to think of, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to send out 85 emails to all these different customers. It's a good way to make things, chunk it down into a very respectful way to get through some of these things. So an enterprise example, maybe you have 10 accounts and you want to reach out to those accounts every single week. Well, there's 5 days in a work week. So you would be reaching out to 2 accounts per day. Same thing. Mid-market, you have 40 accounts. You're reaching out monthly. So there's 20 business days typically in a month. So once again, that's 2 accounts per day. Then SMB, let's say you get 240 accounts. You want to reach out to them quarterly. There's 60 days in a quarter. So that'd be 4 accounts per day. Feel like we're tracking here so far. I'm going to answer questions at the end here. So the next step that you do is you want to just schedule these. So what I would do is create a recurring invite for the same time every single day. And I would set it for 30 minutes a day. And it would be, you can see right here, 2:00 p.m. This is an old one. But what I would do is just list out the accounts I was going to reach out at that day. So what you do is you would take those 10 accounts and then bucket them out into, you would take the 2 accounts per day and then assign them a day. And then you'd create a recurring invite. So that would come up every single week. If you're doing the bi-weekly, then it comes up every 2 weeks. So all you do is create that invite. And in that invite, then you're going to put in the names of the accounts, the contact info, your spreadsheet with like CRM and relevant thing. So the idea is you're not hopping from system to system to system. You have everything. You're taking a little bit of time and sitting down and building this out once so you can just do this repeatedly. Now, when you have everything in, 2 o'clock or whatever time of day that works for you. And I would suggest like try and make this a habit. It makes it a lot easier. And if you stay on top of it, it's really not that much work. You can do this in like 10 minutes. So you could just click on that invite when it pops up. You'll have the hyperlinks with who to email. And then the second part is you're going to put another hyperlink with your value menu in it. And you're saying, what's your value menu? That's the second part we're going to talk about. So let's go. Value menu. I would love to hear if anyone can guess, or I would love to know. Yeah, recording will be. Yeah, I've seen it a few times. You're going to get a recording of this. I promise. The value menu is something where it's a good way to stay on top of your accounts and make this really repeatable for yourself. So the reason I called it this is the same way that you think of a company like McDonald's or Wendy's or anything like that is able to achieve this massive scale is because of repeatability and predictability. And it's standardized. So that's exactly what we want to do as CSMs. And it's not going to work for every single encounter, but a lot of the times you might find that an email that works really well with, let's say, an insurance company that you work with will probably work with the other ones. So don't repeat that work, do it once and have it in a place where you can constantly pull it back and use it. So these 3 items can be incredibly important here. Now, here's what you would do to make it. So all a value menu is, and I'm going to show you the very complicated system that I use in the second part, but it's just a list of helpful content and perhaps plays. And it's managed in a central repository. We'll go through this. But the most effective way to do this is manage it and work together as a team. So asking other people, hey, what emails do you send or what content has been a really big hit for other people? And you start putting that together in an online forum, and I'll show you exactly how I did it. And then you want to tag these things with, hey, this is really good for a VP persona. This is really good for this vertical. This is really helpful if you're trying to renew a customer. This is really helpful if you're trying to, if you're selling to more of a, technical persona. Now, and like I said, very complicated, right? All it was is we put together a Google Sheet and just, it's something that everyone had access to and people were encouraged to put what was working for them on there. And instead of me having to do every single thing, each person on the team does a little bit here, and you're finding out what works the best. So some of the really good tags to put in here is the link to any content that you've found, a description on it, the benefit of it. I saw in the chat here when I asked, like, what's one of the things that gets in the way is I don't know if it's going to be interesting. It's a little bit short for this period, but it's really important when you're sending stuff out like this. If you've ever heard the acronym WIFM, WIIFFM, what's in it for me? So when you're sending out this, it would just say something like, hey, I know that you're working on XYZ project. This is what another customer is doing, or this might be an interesting article for you. And it doesn't have to be, look at our latest blog on 5 ways to, use AI. It's really like trying to be tailored to them. And the way that you get good at this is by starting to get better at asking questions and understanding like what their priorities are, what do they care about, and then as you have that, starting to note it down. So let's go through some of the best practices of doing this. So when you're sending something like this out, it doesn't mean that you're sending out a cadence and outreach or sales loft and it's the same thing to everyone. That kind of defeats the purpose of this, because if you're just sending out the same crap, people aren't going to care about it. They start to tune out. But if you do take the second to, maybe it's, a few different people in an account, and making sure, like, based on some of your conversations or their persona or any of these kind of common denominators, this is something this person would actually really care about. Another great thing to do is let people know of events that are coming up. That's one thing that always seems to work well. If you can make a connection with another customer, depending on, as long as they're not competing or something, that's one that I was always looking for when I was a leader, and I still find really helpful for those opportunities to meet other people. You can get really creative with different ways to help that customer out. Another good thing is podcast or even compliments. One of my favorite ones is my first job ever. I was selling pharmaceuticals in Alabama and Mississippi. That is SEC football country. So I would always make sure I was either watching the games or checking the scores. And that was something that I would always send a quick email about and just stay top of mind. And the goal isn't always to make sure that this person reads every single email, but like, you want that person to think of you, especially if something else comes up. So it's just your way of staying top of mind. And like we said, adding value and being helpful to them. And then another like best practice here is just make sure that you're keeping some of this stuff organized. So as you go through it, you have this good repository of you can click into, okay, like here's my list of people at this account in that invite. You can click in, you have their email, that's going to pop up another email. So like the whole thing to make this really scale and work is making sure that you're going through it accordingly. So I actually kind of got through this fairly quickly. So I would love to open it up. I'm seeing a bunch of stuff here. Like, what questions do you have? And like, okay, I'm seeing one right here. And Corey, is there a certain way we want to take questions?
Yeah, please go ahead and submit your questions. We have, about 15 minutes, so we do have a
Yeah.
good amount of time.
Mhm.
Let's see, we do have a question, and I think you might have covered a little bit of this. She's asking, I guess, her marketing department sends newsletters with content and things already to customers. Is there a way that she could also reach out without it being too overwhelming
Yeah,
at the
that's a
same
really
time?
good call. So make sure that you're on the same emails that your customers get. Like on that, there's usually you can subscribe to those yourself, so you would see like what people send out. Another thing too is just like keeping like I don't know, it depends on the size of your company, but if you're at a you know I don't know, like small, not smaller to like mid-sized company, you might know the marketing people. So it's like they tend to have this work off a calendar, so you know like what's impactful. But another thing that I didn't expressly mention is like you don't have to just send your company stuff. So I think it can be even more impactful if you're like, hey, and some of the ones I always love to go to are like Gartner, McKinsey, Forbes, like any good industry leading research on something that's something they care about. So I would even or on the side of sending things that are less likely to like that your marketing team would send out because it's that more unique and sometimes a lot more valuable.
Awesome. We have a question about the matrix you were talking about and the invites to put on the calendar. Is that invite just for yourself, or are you also sending that invite to your customer
Yeah,
as a
great
reoccurring
question.
meeting?
Yeah, and one other thing is I'm going to send like this as a playbook to everyone who signed up for this, so you can kind of go through it and just have a good way to like keep on top of this stuff. So with that, um, I would say for those ones, like I would just keep that for myself. And it was like a helpful way where I could just like stay on top of that stuff. So I wouldn't send it to like anyone else. It's just a good way for you to keep organized.
Awesome. We have a question that says,
And then Corey, 1 second.
yeah,
I forgot to
absolutely.
mention on this. So we're doing another one Thursday
Yeah,
on bouncing back in CS. So like if you're dealing with a lot of setbacks or challenges, definitely join that one. It'll probably be a little bit longer. But in this QR code, I'm running a survey to figure out like what content people are looking for. So you can win a free call if you sign up for that. So it takes about 60 seconds. So I could appreciate if anyone wants to check that out. But back to
awesome.
the questions.
Yeah. So question, even if I prioritize and plan out my day, I consistently don't get all of my daily tasks done. I
Mhm.
really don't think this is a me issue, but more of a workload issue. Any
Yep.
thoughts on what to do there?
Yeah, that's that resonates. So one thing that like that's kind of one of my specialties in my practice. And one thing I always love talking about is the 80-20 rule. So understanding like, that what that means is that 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. And it's not always exactly that number, but the whole idea is that like there's certain things that you do that are a lot more valuable and meaningful. There's other things you do that might be wasting your time. And you probably agree with that too. That part comes down to having some of those conversations with either your boss. There's ways you can start to automate that. So it's trying to figure out like how can I make sure I'm focusing on the right time or the right things, because I would say like this should be a priority, but it's trying to figure out like I would say go through your next few days and write out like what are some of the things that you could potentially either automate, take off your plate, or might not want to go with.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, let's see. Just reading through, sorry. What was the equation? What was the equation you created for the number of accounts to contacts based on the number of accounts you manage?
Yep. So it's amount of accounts divided by number of days to reach out. So the enterprise example is you have 10 accounts. There's 5 business days. So 10 divided by 5 is 2 a day.
Makes sense. Thank you. Let's see.
And then I'm seeing a lot of
Yeah.
questions come through the chat. If you just put them in
Oh,
the
I was
Q&A
looking there.
part,
Yep.
so I can get to these after too. So it seems like there's a bunch. So, and then Jamie, that was so nice of you.
Um, are there any best practices for clients who are thinking about churning? Any proactive outreach or best practices for these clients that are at risk?
So the that's why something like this is so important, because like as soon as the deal's signed, like the natural motion is toward churn. So like I think you probably lose more customers with onboarding than anything else. So like this is another thing where when you first bring that customer on, it's super important to understand like this is another concept I get into a little bit, but like you need to understand like what does that like why did they buy and like what do they want? And there's two answers that you're going to get, or two levels of answers, and there's something in sales called the power line. And above the power line is like your VPs and execs, and they care about other things than maybe the end users or like frontline managers. So typically, like one thing I'll coach on people to do is like you want to understand both those reasons. So in that example, you have and this is another thing why like if you're trying to talk to VPs or bring them to your QBRs, and you're talking about like how your AI saves them time or something like that, like they're going to tune out really quickly. But so it's all about knowing the language of each. So that's kind of a tirade there, but I would say like if you're trying to get those execs involved, it's figuring out like what are the business priorities. So understanding like, hey, if I'm a marketing automation tool, I want to understand like what are their growth numbers? Do they have like certain lead targets they need to hit? And that's what I like talk about how we help them do, or how we're helping other customers do that, because that's something they're going to want to listen to. They love talking about trends. Whereas an end user, you're talking about like, oh, here's what our roadmap looks like. Here's some of the helpful things here. So I hope that helps, and that's something I could love to go into. And then like if you have questions like that, yeah, that chat form that I have is really helpful too, or the survey.
Awesome. Um, any best practices for proactive outreach when your champion leaves?
Yeah, that's a tough one. So once again, like it's easier to do it ahead of time when you have like a few different relationships in the account. So I think that's always like a good measuring stick. I'll go back to that, like the power line going above and below it, is you want to have at least one on each side, and then know like what success looks like to them and what they care about. So if you lose an executive, then you can reach out to the other person and say like, hey, what's going on here, what's changed, like can you help coach me up on like who's taken over and what do they care about. Whereas if you lose like your end user champion, then you can go to the executive and say like, hey, we've worked so hard, we have a lot of things going, last thing I want to have is like lose momentum. But if you only had one of those, then you're completely starting over from scratch. And like the way to get that is you just want to understand like what they need, and the way you do that is just ask good questions, which sounds
Okay,
super simple, but it's a learned skill over time.
sure. Um, as a CSM, I feel like a lot of work gets delegated to us. How can we communicate our capacity to our team members without it coming across as complaining?
No, I think that's the thing that happens all the time. So check out the last webinar I did with Turn Zero on like the tough convos in CS. I think that's something where like going back to the 80/20, like knowing like what are the things that you do that are really important, and pushing back on the things that might be like noise. I once had a sales rep send me his QBR form to fill out, and I flat out said NO on an email. So it's like just pushing back on things like that, and like you can be totally respectful about things like that. That's a little bit different of an example, but um, I think like have that conversation with your manager first and be like, okay, like here's all of the things we have, like what's the priority here? Or you can even, to make it even easier, of like, okay, like I understand the top two or three things we want to do is this. I feel like I'm doing X, Y, and Z, and maybe D and G are like taking away from that. Because like it's like anything else, like um treat yourself like you're an engineer. Like you can only build so many products at a time. Like there's a certain amount of throughput that any CSM has. So it's really important that you're build one feature instead of like almost kind of building 20 features, because you're going to feel bad about yourself and not as much gets done.
Absolutely. Let's see. Can you share any tips for setting boundaries with clients to help from feeling overwhelmed all the time?
Yeah, I'd love to know a little bit more on that. Once again, that other webinar is super helpful there. Like I give like very much like step by step things there. But like in that webinar, I talked about like one of the huge things with anything like boundaries or something like that is like explain why and like just let them know your point of view. And like don't go like just be empathetic about it. Be like, hey, I understand that's what you're looking for, but like I'm trying to like my top three things are like XYZ and it's going to be difficult. So like one of the top ones that I heard through like coaching people or other challenges is like customers trying to have you do their support tickets for them or something like and being honest of like, hey, if I do that, then I'm not able to do anything like really helpful for you. And like there's a process and it's actually going to get done slower.
Okay. We have a question that says, do you have any specific tips with transitioning your communications as the renewal date comes closer for your customers?
Transitioning your communications, like to someone else.
I don't know. I think they probably mean like changing the conversation probably to be about the renewal.
Um, so I know a lot of people get uncomfortable about like the sales conversation, but I would say if you are really good about like knowing their goals and like how they measure success and like tying it to some type of a use case or project that affects the three buckets are like people spend money because they want to make more money, they want to save money, or they want to avoid risk. So if you understand like, okay, what is the use case they're trying to use, and then you want to be able to like somewhat measure that. And as you're having conversations with your customers on a quarterly basis, it should be like, how are we doing against those goals? So like how much money have we helped you save? And that's something where like you got to get creative. There's definitely a lot of things you can do there. It's not the easiest thing, but like there's a lot of good stuff out there that you can learn of like having those conversations. And then like it just becomes a no-brainer of like, hey, your renewal's coming up. Like, do you want to grow it or something like that? And that like the more that it's like a no-brainer, we're like, oh,
Mhm.
this partner gets me, they're super helpful, we're killing it with their platform, like that's where you want to get to. And it's not easy, but when you get there it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I
I'm not
actually saw,
sure.
can I get one of these? I saw
Yeah,
one that I really liked.
please.
I feel like there's a fine line between proactive outreach and outreach overkill. Love that. And I'm a big like less is more person. I would rather like have a good reason to reach out to someone. And like I know that there's a thing that I listed here of like all of that stuff, but I think it like outreach overkill is like when things aren't relevant. I think frequency is a big thing too, but like I'd say like the number one kind of offender is like sending something that like doesn't matter. It feels like there's, absolutely zero personalization there and it feels like more transactional. So I'd rather send out like one really good email a month than send out like, 20 cadences to someone.
That makes sense.
And then if you,
Yeah.
like all of these, it depends, but like if you have 800 accounts, like then of course like if you're doing more of like the tech touch model, like that's kind of something that you have to work with or do. If you have like thousands of people that you need to communicate with, like maybe it's like even my newsletter, like I try and only send it out once a week because I don't want to like I hate getting emails too, but like I still want to like there's certain ones that I like to read, so I don't mind getting them like once or twice a week.
Yeah. We have a question, and I've seen this more and more, so interested in your thoughts. What do you think about office hours to keep an eye on clients? Is it useful or not? And is it normal to have the same clients in these office hours over and over again?
I like that trend. I actually do it with my own business too. And I think you're going to see like some repeat people, but I think the benefit there is I've always been a fan of like if you can get other customers who are happy talking with each other, because then they can share like, oh,
Mm,
this worked really well with me. So you're almost like taking a little off your, but it's a little dangerous because you're giving up trust, which no one likes. But if you like know the customers, that can be huge. But if you have someone that might be a maniac, and I don't want them meeting other people, so like anything else, it depends.
awesome. Well, I think that brings us to almost the end of our time we have here today, but please do remember we have another quick hit webinar happening on Thursday, and we'd love to have you join us for that. We will be sending out today's recording with a PDF of the slides. We'll be receiving that email tomorrow. And thanks for joining us today, and happy CSM Appreciation Week. And thanks, Ryan.
Thanks all.